What up, world? It's your boy Mark Walter Ward, Super Fact Show, Super Fast Network. Today we got with us Mr. Lance Scott Walker, co-author of the seminal Houston rap book. If you can find one, I would highly suggest you get it. This is one of the most beautiful and interesting books I've ever read about rap, especially a region. If you're familiar with it, you'll recognize everything and love it. If you're not, you'll learn all the stuff you need to know. And then the most recent, he released a book about DJ Screw, A Life in Slow Revolution. That's available at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. I would highly suggest you read that. I've been not a lifelong Screw fan, but I've been listening to Screw music since the late 90s. And I done moved and lived in Houston and in A-Leaf and studied it extensively. And I learned so much from this book that I didn't know. So it was truly a pleasure. But after that long-winded ass preamble, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. You know, you've already done the rounds a little bit, and we don't want to give away too much about the book. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start a little bit about you coming from the book as a self-described white punk rocker from Galveston Island who moved to Houston in what, the early 90s?
Yeah, 1992.
How did you get into Houston rap? Was it just like coming from DC? We love Houston rap. We were buying all the Rap A Lot, which is pretty much what we got. And it was just the sound that appealed to, it just sounded so different. Like those Rap A Lot, those old 90s Rap A Lots mixed by Mike Dean, they just had such like a more expansive sound. If you were into the musicality, Rap A Lot had, or Texas music in general had something to offer that you weren't necessarily getting on a Clue tape,
Yeah, I mean, I got into Houston rap music, when I was in high school in the late 80s, that's when Ghetto Boys broke, regionally, at least. They weren't a national group yet. I mean, they were,
we were listening to them. We were listening to them. We had Mr. Stark. We had all that. We did Ghetto Boys, the original lineup. Was it Freaks in My Car, whatever? Car Freaks. Yeah. Oh yeah, that was definitely getting played in DC. DC always loved Rap A Lot.
That broke, and it was really before Willie D and before Scarface, and we were hearing Raheem, we were hearing Royal Flush, Def 4, other groups from Houston. So Galveston is 45 minutes from Houston. That's where people from Houston go to the beach for the most part. So growing up in Galveston, we got Houston's culture. Every weekend, people from Houston would come to Galveston, go to the beach. They'd wear their shirts, whatever it was. We were picking up on stuff from Houston. So by the time I moved to Houston in 1992, I really moved there to play in the like kind of punk and heavy metal scene. I was a drummer, and I moved up there with my band, and then started playing for some other bands in Houston. But right when I moved to Houston was the time like Ghetto Boys were actually breaking nationally, and Mind Playing Tricks and We Can't Be Stopped. That was all, summer of 1992, and that was right about the time I moved there. So I was familiar with that part of Houston rap. When I was in Galveston, we didn't know anything about DJ Screw, but in the years after I moved to Houston, I'd say, by like about 1995, 1996, you were hearing them everywhere in the city. So you couldn't miss it.
Before we get into all that, do you still play music?
I do.
Yeah.
And nobody knows me for that, but I do play music. Yeah. I'm in a group called Bull Thieves.
The group called what?
Bull Thieves. Bull Thieves. Bull Thieves.
Bull Thieves. Got you. Hey, it doesn't matter if you're known for it as long as you enjoy it, right?
I do. Yeah. That's the whole thing. I don't tour with it, and I haven't played a live show in probably eight or 9 years. I think probably 9 years. But yeah, it's still music is my first love, and so one of the ways that manifests is that I ended up writing about it. But I've also played music, since I was 15, 16 years old.
Who's like the all-time, I don't know if greatest is overrated, but who's somebody I should check out from the Houston punk scene from any time? Just who's your first that comes to your mind for recommendations? I love punk music.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there's lots of good ones. Dead Horse is a thrash band. That's a little bit, heavier than punk, but that's a really good one.
Heavier than punk. That's cool with me. That's thrash.
Yeah. I'm punk thrash guy. So, but Houston's punk scene has always been more about, it's really inclusive. It's not just like straight punk bands. You've got kind of straight punk bands like The Hates or Legionnaire's Disease, those kinds of bands. But then you've also got stuff like a group called Paintings, which was, kind of a more experimental industrial group, but that I always kind of thought of as punk just because of the, their way of going about things. But those are a couple of examples. Bayou Pigs was a great one back in the late '80s, early '90s. I mean, I could go on forever.
I think I'll give Head Thrash and Bayou Pigs a shot, man. So it seems like Houston music, no matter what the genre, is hell of eclectic, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's a really diverse city. So,
Yeah.
you're going to have, you're going to have people moving there for work. You're going to have people moving there for cultural reasons. You're going to have um, people moving there even when they don't plan to. So, there's, Houston's a diverse city that's always becoming more diverse, and it's spread out, so you don't have the same sort of maybe concentrated scene that you might have in somewhere like New York where I live now, or even smaller communities like DC or like Seattle or something like that. But you know, but Houston's always going to have a lot of really diverse things going on. It's just a matter of whether or not anybody from outside the region pays any attention to them.
Well, definitely. So then, continuing with your journey, how did you first start getting immersed in the rap scene? What was it? Photography? Just going to concerts?
I went to concerts throughout the '90s, but as far as how I started getting into it to the point where I was writing about it, it was because I started writing about it, and that was with the photographer Peter Best. You held up that first book, Houston Rap. So that is a photo book that I wrote the oral history for, and that that book was the brainchild of a photographer named Peter Best. And Peter and I go way back to the punk scene, actually, like to 1996 when I was playing in bands and he was taking pictures of shows, and we met that way and got in touch and stayed in touch and became good friends. And then he moved away. He moved to Chicago, San Francisco, he moved to London, and then he eventually ended up in New York. And it was while he was in New York that he said, "Hey, I'm going to start coming back to Houston, and I'm going to do a photo project on, all the Houston rappers." He'd been talking about this for years, but he started working on it in 2004. And then by like late 2004, early 2005, he said to me, "Hey, look, I go and I do these photo sessions, and I take pictures of people, and they tell me these amazing stories. And like this, stories aren't in the photographs. The photographs
Right.
tell their own stories, but like, you're a writer, because I was writing for the Houston Chronicle then. I was the nightlife writer for the Chronicle. And he said, you're a writer, you should get on board with me. You should do this book with me." And that was how it started. So I really, I give him all the credit because he really was the one who brought me in. It's not to say that I wouldn't have found. I was writing about music. I was writing for the papers. It's not to say that I wouldn't have found it, but I certainly wouldn't have found it and had the same sort of introduction if it wasn't for him. I was able to. He was already shooting. He already knew some people. He was already kind of part of the. He was already immersing himself in what was going on, and so I followed right behind the camera, and that's a lot easier for a writer, especially with a photographer who's really good at what they do, because they're really good at kind of inserting themselves into a spot to capture something genuine, without making a lot of waves. And it's not
I
to say
get
that
it.
you're going to be invisible, because you're never going to be invisible, but it's just to say that like you're not making your presence a part of what's going on more than you're just trying to, you know, kind of immerse yourself enough to where you're not distracting from what's actually going on, and being allowed to observe. So I followed behind him, really.
And I imagine, getting photographed in an enjoyable photo shoot kind of loosen them up in a manner that, a journalist is coming at them straight with questions, isn't?
Yeah, well, it loosens up the ego for sure. you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
yeah,
So
and
you start feeling epic, huh?
yeah,
I can dig it.
I mean, and like I said, I really took a lead from him, in because I saw him working with people, who were famous rappers, and then people who were kind of by comparison relatively unknown. And he he uh he, he approached his approach with everyone was the same. He treated everybody like they're really important, and um took the same kind of time and patience with everybody. And um I felt like that was a really important way to go about it, because I was talking to people who, in some cases, were very famous. And then, like I said, I was talking to other people who maybe I'd never heard of, but was still doing my due diligence and you know, thinking about the fact that like in the end, all of this is going to be black print on white paper. All of this is going to sort of even out. So if I'm doing interviews, you know, outside of the club and there's a bunch of noise, or I'm, you know, in somebody's car and there's other people talking, or if we get on the phone whenever I get back to home to New York and we're you know, doing a late night phone conversation, you know, all of that, you know, and no matter how I kind of get the information, no matter how I get the story or get the you know, the interview, and to find quotes to build the oral history from, it's all going to end up evened out in the end. You know, the people whose names you might not know as well are going to end up having the same real estate available to them on the page as the most famous names.
Yeah, that's deep and true and true. So all that being said, you know, obviously you must have observed a lot of you know, just great to legendary moments. What is your favorite Houston rap moment you personally witnessed yourself?
um wow, that's a good question. Well, I've seen lots of great shows over the years, and I've seen some pretty stacked bills that were, you know, pretty amazing to see. I guess there was one I saw with Devin the Dude, Paul Wall, Slim Thug, Chameleonaire, a guy named Aztec, who I don't think is really on the scene anymore, and
Yeah,
Scarface.
he was from he got signed to one of Jay-Z's labels. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. I haven't heard from him in a while, but he was on the bill.
He got some young cats that he be working with called Wolfpack, some Latino cats
Oh, right
down
on,
there. Yeah,
right on.
they dope as fuck. I'll send you the link. They
All right.
they was pushing hard before the pandemic. I ain't seen nothing since then, but they got some real good music. They'll have him on it, Chingo Bling,
Uh-huh.
GT Garza, just all kinds of people that's popping in Houston that might not be known nationally. You know, when
Right.
I was living down there, to go off on a tangent real quick, I was struck by how much money an artist could make without basically ever leaving the Texarkana region. Like there were
Yeah.
so many artists down there that were popping that, and they didn't care if they had. I mean, at the time, it sounds passe now, but they didn't care if they were on MTV. You know, they
Yeah.
didn't care if they were on national radio, none of that.
Right.
They were just good, selling like 5,000 copies of their CD, or you know, this is the time people starting to try to sell like little USB drives and stuff. I don't
Right.
know what. Hey, what to your knowledge, what do Houston rappers try to sell you in the store now or in the parking lot?
Uh, it's not like it used to be.
I'm
It's
sure.
definitely it's definitely not like it used to be with the mixtapes. It's yeah, it's more akin to like it being USB, or you know, they're just trying to promote any way they can because so much of it is digital now.
Yeah.
But you know, we saw that change happening too. You know, we started 2004, 2005, and that's really when, you know, number one, that's in the wake of when Southwest Wholesale, you know, stopped doing business in early 2003. That was a big deal for, you know, local artists in Houston because it was a P&D deal where they could get their stuff produced and distributed and get paid for it. And, you know, so there were a lot of artists who kind of had a setup with Southwest Wholesale where they provide all of the pieces to the album. Here's the music, here's the artwork and everything. And Southwest would take it and develop it and you know, print it and produce it and distribute it to local shops and distributors. And artists in Houston got paid and they did really well. You know, thing is that like,
I mean, not just Houston. I know A-Ball availed himself to Southwest, you know, quite frequently.
yeah, well, those guys were in Houston for a long time. So, you know, those guys were living in Houston for many years, 8 Ball and MJG. And
Yeah.
you know, because their label Swab House was here. And so, you know, they were part of the scene on that level. They were around. But yeah, exactly the same deal. I mean, Southwest started in, you know, the 70s in San Antonio, so they've been around. But their first P&D deal they ever did was UGK. That was the first time that, you know, so whenever they actually branched out into, you know, actually producing and distributing records, it was a rap record that took them in that direction, even though they'd been distributing everything in the years prior to that. But anyway, I just meant to point that out to just say that like there was sort of a vacuum locally at that point because there wasn't anybody doing a P&D like that. And so, you know, some of the labels that were still around had connections to the majors, and some artists like Paul Wall and Mike Jones ended up upstreaming to the majors, and Slim Thug signed directly with a major. And you know, a lot of things moved really fast, and then that's what really put Houston on the map as a city in 2005.
again, being tangential, but that being said, I would encourage anybody to check out Slim Thug's Neptune's album and give it another shot. I think it got unjustly criticized. And if you go back and listen to it, it's great. But that's neither here nor there. The first time you heard Screw music, did you like it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I didn't know what it was, but I thought it was badass. I remember saying, "Oh, that's badass." You know, I heard it in the street, car driving by, and somebody pointed, "Oh, that's that." You know, when you don't know what it is and somebody can explain it to you, they do. And you know, somebody told me that's DJ Screw, and I thought it was killer. I mean, I thought it sounded really, it sounded heavy to me, and I like heavy music. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, not all hip hop is heavy, but I think a lot of hip hop is heavy, and a lot of hip hop has got a lot more in common with punk than we think about. And so the first time I heard DJ Screw, I was like, yeah, it sounded heavy, and I love heavy music.
I mean, in places where there's hip hop and punk things, there's a lot of overlap. You know, talking about DC, you know, Baltimore, all that type of stuff, house music. But I see exactly what you mean about that.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, I know easily my favorite Screw song, like you know, like a you know, a remix song, not somebody freestyling or rapping on it.
Uh-huh.
I can't stand the rain. Do you have one?
Yeah. Yeah, I could listen to that one for a couple of hours, man. I love that one. That one
But like
goes on
that one
forever.
really makes me feel like I'm high if I'm sober.
Yeah. Yeah, he really loved Missy Elliott. You know, he put her on a lot of tapes, and that's easily my favorite mix that he did of a Missy song for sure.
Where, so you know, like I want people to read the book, so I don't want to get too much into the meat of it because it's just like I said, I learned so much of it. But some of the things, so what you were talking about, you kind of gave a brief history of the Houston rap scene, and I'm curious as to like what the battles you described that like Willie D and people before him were winning in the '80s. What was the nature of the battles? Because like in a lot of places, a battle back then would kind of be just like who was nicer as opposed to like making fun of each other.
Uh-huh.
And then it was places where it was like, you know, like the New York shit or the 8 Mile shit where it was a lot of making fun of each other, but it had to be, you had to be nice. But then because I traveled a lot, but then it was spots where it was just like basically like you call it cutting the dozens or playing the dozens or ranking, we called it Jonas, but it was basically just like barely rhyming Jonas. You know what I mean? So
Uh-huh.
what was the Houston ones like when people were battling?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know what they were like in the um hallways of schools and in the you know
Yeah, and I'm talking
playgrounds
about
and
like
that
those
sort of thing.
contests that like Willie D was winning that you were
Yeah,
describing.
but at the Rhinestone Wrangler, you had two different contests on the nights whenever they did it, on a Sunday night, which was they did the rap attack contest, which was basically it was a lyrical contest. You know, it was to see who could, you know, who could come up with the nicest rhymes, who could come up with the nicest flow, who had the best delivery, all that sort of stuff. And so, you know, whoever won that contest, that was a little bit friendlier. And so whoever won that contest won $100. I think it was the prize money. So, but what people really wanted to see was what came at the very end of the night, basically at last call when they were closing up, which was the cap rapping or rank rapping. And that's when, you know, that's when people would get really dirty and really just nasty and yeah, making fun of whoever, you know, they were rapping against and like really wanted to drive them and, you know, pile drive them into the ground and, you know, lyrically destroy them, you know, and sometimes because you genuinely didn't like them, or other times because you just wanted to stomp out the competition and be ruthless. And there was definitely a stretch during those years between about 84 and 86 where that competition was really hot. And anybody in the city who had any kind of skills was trying to make their way out there and be a part of that as long as they were old enough to get in the club, which not everybody was, you know. So there were kind of two components to that. You know, it was a little bit different, but the cap rapping or the rank rapping was what that was the real prestige. If you could win that contest at the end of the night, you were really winning.
Now I wonder if any footage of any of that exists.
Wait, oh, I don't know. I've never seen any. I've seen a couple pictures from the Rhinestone Wrangler, but you know, people just didn't carry around video
Right.
cameras like that back then. I mean, even you know, people had video cameras back then, but they still just didn't carry them around like that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, if you was in the wrong place, they might make you a target. Those video cameras in the mid '80s were expensive as hell. Those home video cameras.
Yeah, or they just wouldn't even let you in. You show up with a camera and they're like, "Get out of here," you know.
Ah, yeah,
Now,
that's a good point too.
you know, I mean, you know, and then what do? You know, you go put it in your car and let everybody watch you put it in your car, you know. So, I mean, you know, there just was people just weren't filming stuff like that back then. I wish they had been. Man, it'd be cool to see that.
Where you know another thing I didn't know was about the slow tapes were popular in Miami for I guess a while. Cause I don't know if they are now or not. But to your knowledge, how similar or different were they than like screw? I mean, nothing's like screw, but you know,
Uh-huh.
let's say the post screw. I don't want to say imitators, so I don't want to be insulting. The post screw generation of slow down DJs.
Uh-huh.
How similar or different would they be to one of those Miami tapes?
Um, Different. I mean, you know, the Miami stuff, like, you know, I've heard a little bit of it, but not that much. But just from the descriptions of talking to Disco Dave and talking to other people who've been around it and heard that, it's it's not quite as slow as what Screw was doing. It is slowed down to a degree, you know, and there's no chopping, you know, that was something that, you know, really Daryl Scott was doing in Houston, and that Screw started doing. So you know, I'd be really, really surprised if Screw ever heard those tapes. You know, I'd be really surprised if some of those tapes made their way to Houston, and for that Screw would have heard them. It's possible, you know, but just nobody ever mentioned anything about that. You know, that he would have heard Jam Pony Express or Disco Dave or anybody else that was doing, or even Sonido Dueñas in Monterey. You know, he was slowing stuff down starting in about 1992, which is, you know, really the time that Screw's tapes were getting out there. So I said this in an interview last week. I'd be very surprised if Screw knew about Sonido Dueñas, just because we just weren't connected like that in the early 90s. You know, people didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have the internet. Like, I think it's probably difficult for some people to relate to how we were connected back then, and we just weren't connected in that same way. A lot of stuff was word of mouth, and then way up here was MTV. If you ever got into, you know, if you were ever on MTV or anything like that, but you know, but between that was, you know, kind of a mushy middle of, you know, just hoping your stuff got out there and hoping you found out about stuff.
Where there's no sound cloud. And I wasn't trying to imply that it was derivative or not. I'm just talking about just in general. Like if they just sounded like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
completely different.
yeah. No, they're
Clearly
definitely
Crew
different.
didn't copy, but I'm sorry, that was a zoom. Go ahead.
I was saying, yeah, I mean, definitely different. Not as slow. What I heard is not as slow as what Screw was doing. The Screw was doing it slower than anything I ever heard. You know, he was really cranking it down.
You know, I really listened to a lot of Screw, so I doubt he was copying. I mean, everybody has influences, but I mean,
Oh yeah,
if anything, it would seem to me that if there was anything that was even remotely close to copying, he would run away from it. You know what I mean?
yeah. No, he was totally doing his own thing. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you know, I just pointed that out to say that, like, you know, people had slowed down records before, and people had done chopping before, and Daryl Scott had done both, even if that wasn't like really that wasn't his thing. He didn't make it his thing the way that Screw did. You know.
and like you, I don't know if you said it straight out, but you certainly alluded to it. There's a musicality to what Screw did, like
Oh
this is,
yeah,
you know, unsurpassed. Like a lot
oh,
of
yeah,
people make DJ mixes, but they're not DJ AM. You know,
yeah.
you know, like sometimes there's just I don't even know how I don't even got the words for it, but it's just something more than just mixing.
Yeah, yeah, just digging deeper and really feeling the music and like showing you where he's feeling it. You know, like I'm gonna dig in right here. I'm gonna run this back, or I'm gonna do some cuts right here. I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna repeat these lines. I'm gonna flash back and forth because I want you to hear what he's saying, and I'm gonna flash back and forth, and then I'm gonna wind it back and make you hear this again. You know, like he's directly telling you in no uncertain terms, hey, I want you to hear this. I'm going to run it back. I want you to hear this. I want you to listen to this. This is something I'm feeling. I'm not just, you know, running back some random words or a random phrase. I want you to hear this and I want you to feel it.
Now, tell me if you think if I'm on to something with this or not, but I because you know you would have a more up close understanding than me, but kind of like from the outside looking in, it seems to me that being affiliated with DJ Screw helped Lil Flip's career the most. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
Did it help Lil Flip more than anybody else?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. Um, sure. I mean, I think being affiliated with DJ Screw helped everybody who was affiliated with DJ Screw. You know, I mean, Screw provided a platform. He wanted to put people out there. He wanted to let people ride on his back and ride on his wings and get out there themselves. So I'm sure that there's somebody that it benefited more than other people, but I don't know if I'm really qualified to say. I would just say that it, without a doubt, it helped everybody. And I mean, some people, like, who knows if they ever would have been artists if it wasn't for Screw.
Right.
Matt Grace said that straight up. He said, I never would have been an artist. There's no way. I never would have been a rapper. He said, I thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. You do all this work and then you get paid 10% of it at the end of the day. He's like, I want to manage y'all. That was something he told me.
That stuck out to me. That definitely stuck out to me when I was reading.
I put that quote in the book because I thought that was a really important perspective. He's like, I thought it was the dumbest thing in the world, and then Screw turns me into a rapper. And then where would we be without Dat Boy Grace / Matt Grace? So many great contributions to Screw tapes and his own albums, and going and getting locked away. He was locked up for years. I wrote letters to him in prison. We wrote letters back and forth, and to see him get out and stay out and reshape his career and kind of rename and sort of re-identify himself and everything. And he told me just a few months before he died, we talked in an interview, and he was still grateful for Screw at that point, and saying that, like, I never would have been doing this without him.
That's solid. RIP. I'm sorry. Yeah, I see. I didn't pick up that he had died.
Yeah. He died in 2017, I think it was.
See, I moved from there. I moved to Florida in 2015. And, that's about the time that, like, blogs died, and I guess it's really not as much place to get readily available rap news if you're not on social media a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's in the book. It's in the last chapter. I don't know if you're on the last chapter yet, but
man, I be reading a lot. I read it like a week ago, and or like 6 days ago. And I read like 3 books since then. I went back to it today.
Right on.
Well, one thing, I used to have 2 Screw tapes, but I lost a lot of stuff in the flood. And do you know of a place where you can buy an OG Screw tape at?
I maybe at Screwed Up Records and Tapes.
Yeah, I mean
sometimes they will have them. I've definitely bought a couple from there in the past. They're not cheap; they're expensive, but they should be. I have an original.
I take anything, but I used to have the UGK one. Man, I'm so mad I don't have that anymore.
Oh, the Riding Dirty one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool, and it's got Grace on it too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you think that, or not? It seems like the common consensus for the most part is that the June 27th is the best one of all time. Where do people rank that Riding Dirty?
That's the most. June 27th is the most famous one for sure, no doubt. I mean that I think, I don't know how you would ever track how many copies it sold, but it was released in 1996.
If you look it up on YouTube, it's got hella views on many different videos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it debuted July 4th, 1996, and it had a massive coming out party that weekend where everybody was hearing it. Like, you got a song that's 35 minutes long, like, your chances of hearing it are pretty good. You're driving around town or whatever, and so people just kept hearing this song, and then once they're listening to it, you can't stop listening because it's all these different voices coming in, and you're like, where are we going to go next? Is Big Mo going to come back in singing again? Who's going to step up? Am I going to hear that guy Youngster again? Like, it's really an amazing piece of work that that people are just absolutely in love with, and it's great to see it all these years later that love just keeps building on it.
Yeah. Like again, I was revisiting that today because your book just put me now every time I see that cover, I'm gonna want to listen to it. But yeah, it's hella vicious. I'm gonna post this on a Dirty Good Bastard, and I'll make sure to include like the Spotify player so people can check it out. I would highly recommend you check it out. It just starts off hard and never stops. Yeah. What was your reaction when you heard the story of like Screw falling asleep at the turntables and not missing a beat and mixing records? Because like I ain't never heard nothing like that.
I mean, I heard that story 4 or 5 times at least.
Oh yeah, I mean it has to be
I
true.
mean, it's all
No
yeah,
way.
and it's always amazing to think about. He must have had some sort of there must have been some sort of purgatory between sleep and being awake that he was able to kind of exist in a little bit, to where he's still hearing stuff and he's still somehow clicked in. But yeah, I heard that story a bunch of different times from a bunch of different people and different incidents, different houses, different everything. And that he would work so much because he never slept. So if you never sleep, your body's gonna be fighting you. Your body's gonna be pumping drugs into your system, telling you, go to sleep. I'm trying to make you more tired. Go to sleep. You know. But he would go days without sleeping, and then sometimes he might sleep for a day or two. But he he what he didn't do is he didn't get enough sleep during his lifetime for sure. So you're gonna hear stories like that, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, still, I mean, many people don't get sleep, but they fall asleep, but they're not able to do, like musical genius stuff.
Yeah.
You know how people talk about the muse, from reading your book and the way people speak of them, and the way you sum it up. Sometimes it's almost like he never had to find the muse. Like the muse just lived within him at all times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
He was always tapping into it. I mean, he was really driven by the music. It doesn't seem like he ever got bored with it. Doesn't seem like he ever got burned out. He was even in the moments where, like I write about when he was going to the Justos in New York in 1999. He he slept really hard on the plane, and fell asleep and missed a flight and everything. But it was because he'd been working for like 4 or 5 days straight. You know, making tapes and recording and really perfecting his craft. I think practicing in a lot of ways. Wanting to go up to New York, I think connected to his craft. Even if he wasn't necessarily bringing a bunch of fresh mixtapes with him. I mean, maybe he did. I don't know, but definitely wanting to be connected like that, and definitely wanting to, you know, um, in his mind at least, leave no doubt about where he stood with his music whenever he went up to New York, to meet everybody.
if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, right?
That's right.
So what was let me put you like this. There's been a great Scarface book. There was Nancy Byron's great Pimp C book. Your two contributions. So not necessarily for you to write, but just in general. What else in Houston rap do you think deserves a book? I would say I would like kind of like an academic style book about the whole history of Latina rap in the Houston, Texas area in general, Dallas too. And I think UGK probably needs like a bookstore book.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, okay, I'm probably the wrong one to ask, because I would have way too many answers for you. I mean, I think.
Like I just said, not I said next, not necessarily most important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would be next. It's a matter of really who picks it up. But I agree with you that somebody could definitely write a history of Latino rap in Houston, and you could talk about South Park Mexican and Grim, and like I said, Aztec and Chingo Bling, and plenty of artists that you could add into that mix that maybe aren't as well known. P3, you know, Carmen San Diego, just so many artists. So yeah, I mean, I think somebody could almost definitely, pick that up and turn that into a book. There's a lot to cover there. The cultures are very linked. I mean, they're in Houston, they're super linked, but that doesn't mean you could take that focus for sure and make it. And then I mean, all the stars in Houston. I mean, I think there could be a book about just about any of them.
True indeed, true indeed. Definitely like an overall rap a lot book, although I guess one might have to tread carefully in those waters. Is there is there any subject that would interest you enough to write a book about?
Not a rap a lot book.
Yeah.
Definitely not that. I don't know. I'm working on 2 other books right now, but they don't have to do with Houston rap music. So um, if I do return to it, it'll be a couple stones further down in the pond.
I see you got like man, you got more books than me, and I rarely see that. Can you give me a book recommendation? What's something good to read that you've read recently?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I've been reading this right here, the 1619 Project, and this was a New York Times bestseller, and it's a bunch of different writers writing on the origins of African Americans and the origins of this country and the origins of you know enslavement and abuse and horrors that were inflicted on people brought here and hundreds of years ago, and it really a
It's a dense
contemporary.
read.
What's that?
It's a dense read.
It's a very dense read. Yeah, it's a lot to go through. There's a lot of stuff in there, but it's really, really important. There's a section on music too that just will blow your mind. I skipped ahead to read that one, and then I came back to the early chapters and started reading my way through. But I got a ways to go. But it's one of those. I write in my books. I usually do it with pencil, but I do write in all my books, and I've got a bunch of stuff in there of just stuff that I want to go back and just go back and reread this line. There's so much good writing in that book. There's probably looks like about 24 writers that contributed to that, and so that's really a fantastic book. I've also been reading a book called oh God, what is it? South of America or South to America, and I don't have it around. I think it's in the other room. By Imani Perry, and that's a great one. She goes back to her roots in the South and kind of explores around and writes about different places, and I'm about maybe a third of the way through that one, so that's a great one.
Does her name start with an I?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. I read the 1619 Project, but I'll check that out. You said South to what? I'm sorry.
South to America.
South to America. Gotcha. Yeah, that is kind of good stuff to read, because it sure as hell is confusing in the country right now. So anything that can help you understand it a little better can't be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, great historians and writers that you can trust to deliver good information. There's lots of misinformation out there in 2022, and it's really important to know your sources and to really kind of zoom out and look at where you're getting your news, and watching out.
Would you have any advice on how to be discerning? I guess you were about to say something, but like my kids ask me that a lot, especially as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
It's so many different sides coming at them, and they ask me a lot. How do you tell who you should listen to?
Well, I'd say don't watch cable news just in general. Across the board, right wing or left wing. It's just it's mostly opinion, and it's really presented as fact in a lot of cases, and I don't think that that's in the best public interest. I mean, I'd say like I said, just look at the sources. I mean, there's like a PBS news show that's like not sensational, but it's pretty great to watch, because they really break down news in a way you can trust. I look at international news versus stateside news, and I compare the two, and it's a matter of writing that you can cross-reference and look up, and like I said, you begin to trust your publications or distrust other publications, and
when you start watching,
you got to feel your way out, but you got to do the research too, and really look into things.
Yeah, you do. When you first started watching that international news, it's shocking how differently Americans are viewed in the rest of the world than we view ourselves.
Yeah, and especially now too, because we're so partisan here. We've got such a divide between political parties and ideologies now that did not exist 30. It's not to say that it didn't exist 30 years ago. I mean, 48 years old. I've been around, but it wasn't like it is now, and so.
Now I'm 44. I agree. I never saw anybody fight over power. I mean, maybe like a drunk argument might start, but escalate. But like I never saw anybody like fighting where they be voting at or nothing. Like none of that type
Yeah,
stuff.
it wasn't polarized. You didn't have people hassling you at the at the voting place, the polling place. Um, it's very different now. I mean, cable news has polarized us, you know, over the last 20 25 years in a way that it's just, I think there's so much damage that's been done. I don't know how we come back from that.
Do you ever delve into those type of waters in your writing? Like, do you ever do any edits, op-eds, or anything like that?
No, I mean, over the past couple of years, I've mostly been working on the book, so
Right.
I
True.
haven't written any articles. I've been asked now. I did get asked to write an op-ed um, coming up here that I think will probably come out in June or July. Wow, it is already June, isn't it? So maybe July. uh, and so yeah, I haven't. But my platform is sort of changing underneath me right now because you know I'm just I'm just getting more support now than I've ever had. I'm getting more followers. I'm getting more interest. I'm selling more books, and so when those sorts of things happen, more opportunities become available to you. Like, and I know because I've seen it in the past with just other stuff I've worked on, and it was incremental compared to what it is now. But you know, so we'll see. I definitely like to do more of that. I love working on the books, but I do also love publishing writing. More frequently than every 4 years.
And the way you were speaking on it just now, that those words would have sound great on paper. But I don't want to hold you up too much longer. I really appreciate your time. I hope I can do a small part to help your book sell more. And like, like I said, I really appreciate it. And I look forward to reading more from you in the future. I'll make sure to include the link to buy the book in the show notes and all the socials. Is there anywhere online that you interact with people the most?
Um, Probably Instagram, I'd say. You can find me everywhere. I'm not on TikTok, but I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook.
And
I kind of check for messages, but I don't really spend any time on there. But
and,
I do like it as a tool to connect with people. Um, so yeah, if somebody wants to connect with me, they can just find me. Just write to me. I'm out there.
and Instagram, it's LANCESWALKER, right?
That's right. Uh-huh. Lance S.
Yes,
Walker.
yes, sir. Well, like I said, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for these two wonderful books. And I look forward to seeing what you got in the future. And you have a good night, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.